He left her for a wealthy bride. Then the mafia boss took her hand and shattered his pride forever. Ryan Prescott sent the text at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, 2 weeks before their wedding, while Emily was still counting the day's drawer at the bakery her grandfather built with his bare hands. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." 7 words. 5 years. Gone. She found out about Charlotte Kingsley 3 days later, not from Ryan, but from a glossy engagement announcement posted to social media like a trophy. Ryan in a tailored suit, Charlotte in pearls. Both of them smiling like the world had finally arranged itself correctly around them. Emily had flour on her hands when she saw it. She didn't cry. She went back to work. But the worst wasn't losing him. The worst was what came next. When the building that housed everything her family had ever built was suddenly sold, and the new landlord tripled the rent without a single phone call. The new landlord's name was Dominic Callahan, and every person in Brooklyn told her the same thing: don't go near him. She went anyway. If you believe a woman who has already lost everything still has the power to walk into a mafia boss's office and come out with more dignity than she walked in with, then stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the night everything broke open. The text came in at 11:47 p.m., and Emily almost didn't check her phone. She was crouched behind the front counter of Hartley's bakery, running through the end-of-day numbers the way she had done every night for the past 3 years, since her father's back got bad enough that the closing shift fell to her. The register tape was long. The numbers were close but not comfortable. They rarely were anymore. Brooklyn rents had a way of eating into everything, and the flour supplier had raised his prices twice in 18 months without any apology attached. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside the register tape. She finished the column she was adding before she picked it up. That was the kind of person Emily Hartley was. She finished what she started. It had always been both her best quality and the thing that made certain kinds of people take advantage of her. She read the text. She read it again. Then she set the phone face down on the counter and sat very still for approximately 30 seconds before she picked up the register tape and finished the rest of the numbers. Her hands were steady. Her throat was not. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." No call, no explanation, no request to talk. Just a text message dispatched into the night like a piece of junk mail, as though 5 years of her life, of Sunday mornings and arguments about the thermostat and long drives upstate and the ring she had already tried on twice in a jewelry store window, could be addressed and resolved with a thumb movement on a glass screen. She locked the bakery at midnight. She walked the 4 blocks home through the air that smelled like October, cold and slightly burnt, the way Brooklyn always smelled when the season changed. She let herself into the apartment above the garage where her father still lived. She did not wake him. She sat in the kitchen with a glass of water and stared at the wall until the feeling in her chest went from sharp to heavy, and then she went to bed. She did not call Ryan back. She would not call Ryan back. That was the one decision she made in those first dark hours, and she held on to it the way a person holds on to something small and solid when everything else is moving. The announcement appeared on Thursday morning. Emily saw it on her phone while she was waiting for the first bread loaves to come out of the oven. Someone she hadn't spoken to in 2 years had tagged her in a comment beneath the photo. The kind of thoughtless cruelty that people perform without realizing it, or sometimes very much realizing it. Ryan and Charlotte Kingsley. Newly engaged. The caption talked about a whirlwind romance and a shared future. Charlotte was photographed in a cream silk blouse and a single strand of pearls that Emily recognized, even from a small screen image, as the kind of jewelry that costs more than Emily's father earned in a year. Ryan was in a suit she had never seen before, dark charcoal, perfectly fitted, and he was smiling in a way that looked practiced, like he had been rehearsing for this version of his life for a while. Charlotte Kingsley, daughter of William Kingsley. The Kingsley shipping empire had been a fixture in Brooklyn and the surrounding port areas for 40 years. Warehouses, freight contracts, import deals, the kind of institutional wealth that made politicians return phone calls quickly. Emily stared at the photo for a long time. Then she took the bread out of the oven before it burned, because the bread did not care about Ryan Prescott, and neither would she. But she understood something now that she hadn't understood when she read the text. This was not about feelings. Ryan had not simply fallen in love with someone else. He had identified an opportunity, weighed it against what he had with Emily, and chosen the one with a better return. He had been doing a calculation, maybe for longer than she wanted to admit, and the calculation had finally resolved itself in Charlotte Kingsley's favor. Emily was not a calculation. She was a woman who got up at 4 in the morning to start the ovens, who spent her weekends helping her father with inventory, who had been saving carefully for years toward a life that turned out to have a quiet trapdoor in the middle of it. The oven timer went off again. She pulled on her mitts and got back to work. The letter from the building management company arrived 11 days later. It was addressed to Thomas Hartley, her father, who was the leaseholder. Emily found him standing at the kitchen table with it in his hands, and the look on his face was the one he had worn when her mother died. A specific blankness that meant he was working very hard not to show her how scared he was. The rent was going up. Not a small adjustment, a number that was nearly 3 times their current monthly payment, effective in 60 days. The building had been sold. The new owner had purchased it as part of a larger property acquisition, and the new leasing terms reflected current Brooklyn market rates for commercial space. There was nothing in the letter that was technically illegal. There was nothing in the letter that felt remotely human. Emily read it twice. Then she looked at her father. "Who bought it?" she asked. He sat down carefully, the way he always sat now, working around the bad disc in his lower back. Management company fronting for someone named Callahan. Dominic Callahan. He said the name the way people in Brooklyn said certain names, quietly, with a very specific kind of care attached to the edges. Emily had heard the name before. Everyone in their part of Brooklyn had heard the name. She had never paid it much attention because people like Dominic Callahan existed in a different layer of the city's reality, a layer that she had always assumed ran parallel to her own without intersecting. "I'll handle it," she said. Her father looked at her with the mixture of gratitude and guilt that had been on his face for 3 years, ever since the bakery started struggling, and Emily quietly stepped in to carry more of the weight than she ever told him she was carrying. "Emily, I'll handle it," she said again, and her voice was calm, and she meant it. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. What she learned over the next 48 hours came from a patchwork of sources. The woman who ran the dry cleaner 2 doors down, an old friend whose brother worked in commercial real estate, a conversation at the coffee counter with a retired city inspector who still knew everybody. Dominic Callahan was 37. He had grown up in South Brooklyn, the son of a longshoreman who had worked the docks and done certain favors for certain people over a period of decades. Dominic had inherited both the work and the favors, and had built on them with a methodical patience that the older men on the waterfront apparently respected enormously. He controlled a significant portion of Brooklyn's commercial real estate through a series of holding companies, not illegally, or at least not provably. He also controlled freight routing, warehouse access, and a number of service businesses that existed in the space where legal commerce and organized crime became difficult to distinguish. He had never been charged with anything that stuck. He was known, universally, to be a man who kept his word when he gave it. He was also known, with equal consistency, to be a man who did not respond well to being pressured, deceived, or treated as though he owed anyone anything he had not agreed to owe. 3 separate people, in 3 separate conversations, told Emily the same thing. Don't go near him. She called his office on a Thursday morning and made an appointment for Friday at 2 o'clock. The woman who answered the phone sounded neither surprised nor unfriendly. She simply confirmed the time and gave Emily the address of an office building in Red Hook that looked, from the outside, entirely unremarkable. Her father didn't know she was going. She didn't tell him because she knew he would spend the night before the appointment unable to sleep, and his back was already bad enough. "I'm not going to tell you that you should feel sorry for us. I'm going to tell you what that building means, not to my family specifically, but to that block. Hartley's has been there longer than most of the residents who live on that street now. We're open at 5 in the morning. We employ 4 people from the neighborhood. We extend credit to families who can't make it to the end of the month. We are not a boutique and we are not trying to be. We are a neighborhood bakery, and those things are disappearing from Brooklyn faster than anyone is keeping count." She paused. "That's what you'd be ending. I just wanted you to know exactly what it is." She stopped talking. The room was very quiet. Dominic looked at her for a moment that stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then he picked up his phone and made a single call. 3 sentences. He set the phone down. "The rent increase will be withdrawn," he said. "Your family's current terms will remain in place." Emily held his gaze. "Why?" He seemed faintly surprised by the question. Not offended, just slightly caught off guard, the way people look when they expected something and received something different. "Because what you said was reasonable," he said. "And because you didn't come in here and try to threaten me, flatter me, or pretend the situation was something other than what it is." She stood. "Thank you." "The bakery," he said. "The plain rolls. Are they made fresh every morning?" She stopped with her hand on the back of the chair. "By 5:30. He nodded once, as though confirming something he had been curious about for a while. She walked out of Dominic Callahan's office with her lease intact, her dignity intact, and a strange, unresolved feeling pressing at the back of her ribs. The specific sensation of having expected the worst from someone and received instead something she didn't have a name for yet. She walked home through the October afternoon. She still had flour under her fingernails from the morning shift. She thought about the way he had looked at her. Not through her, not past her, not with the practiced indifference that wealthy men had always shown her, and not with the theatrical sympathy of men who wanted something from her. He had simply looked at her like she was a person saying a thing worth listening to. Ryan had stopped looking at her like that about a year ago. She hadn't let herself notice it until now. She turned the corner onto her street, and the bakery windows glowed warm in the late afternoon light, and her father was visible through the glass, moving between the display case and the counter the way he had moved through that space her entire life. She pushed the door open. The bell above it rang. "How'd it go?" her father asked without looking up. "Fine," she said. "We're fine." She tied on her apron and got back to work. What she didn't say, what she didn't know how to say or wasn't ready to examine, was that for the first time in 2 weeks, she had felt like herself again. Not the self that Ryan had left behind. Not the self that was managing grief and running numbers and trying to hold everything together by sheer force of routine. Just herself. Saying what was true. Being heard. She didn't let herself think too hard about the fact that it had happened in the office of a man everyone in Brooklyn was afraid of. Some things needed time before you could look at them directly. She reached for the next tray and started over. He came back on a Monday. Emily was behind the counter pulling the last of the morning's sourdough loaves from the cooling rack. When she heard the bell above the door, and she didn't look up immediately because the bell rang 40, 50 times a day, and she had long ago trained herself out of the reflex of looking every single time. She finished setting the loaf down. She straightened. She turned. Dominic Callahan was standing just inside the doorway with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the room the way a person looks when they are doing a quiet inventory of a space, not inspecting it for flaws, just taking it in. The morning light from the front windows fell across the wooden floor in long, pale strips. The bakery smelled the way it always smelled before 10 in the morning, yeast and brown sugar and something warm underneath that Emily had never been able to name because she had grown up breathing it. He was not accompanied by anyone. That surprised her more than his presence did. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "The plain rolls," he said. "You mentioned they were ready by 5:30. She looked at the clock above the register. It was 9:42. "They've been ready for 4 hours. I had a long morning." He said it without apology and without self-pity, the way people state facts about themselves when they are not interested in performing their own suffering for an audience. He looked at the display case. 1 roll, black coffee. She poured the coffee herself. She put a roll on a small plate without being asked if he wanted it on a plate. She handed both across the counter and told him the price, which was the same price she charged everyone, and he paid it without comment or the half-second pause that wealthy people sometimes use to telegraph their awareness that they were slumming. He took the corner table. Emily went back to work. He stayed for 40 minutes. He read nothing, looked at his phone twice briefly, and spent the rest of the time simply sitting with his coffee and his roll and the ambient noise of the bakery. Her father moving in the kitchen, the low murmur of the 2 women at the table near the window, the occasional clank of the cooling rack. When he left, he pushed the chair in behind him and nodded once in Emily's direction. She nodded back. She thought about it longer than made sense, standing at the sink rinsing the portafilter, and then she made herself stop thinking about it. He came back on Wednesday. Same order, same table. 45 minutes. He came back on Friday. This time he stayed an hour. Oh. Her father noticed on the second week. Thomas Hartley was 61 years old and moved like a man who had been arguing with his own body for a decade and was slowly losing the argument. His back was the primary problem, but there was also a knee that clicked going downstairs, and hands that stiffened in cold weather, and a general tiredness that he tried to hide from Emily with the same unsuccessful effort that she tried to hide her worry from him. He was a big man gone slightly soft, with gray in his beard and reading glasses. He was always setting down somewhere and forgetting. He was not a foolish man. He came out of the kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon and stood behind Emily at the counter and watched Dominic at the corner table for a long, quiet moment. "That's him?" he said. His voice was low. Not frightened. Her father didn't frighten easily, but careful. "Yes," Emily said. She was arranging the pastry case. "He comes every day?" "Most days." Thomas was quiet for another moment, then, "He bother you?" "No." "He wants something?" Emily considered the question seriously. "I don't think so." Her father made a sound that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite skepticism. He went back to the kitchen. He didn't bring it up again that day, but she noticed him glancing toward the corner table more than once through the pass-through window, with the expression he had worn when she was 16 and started coming home later than she said she would. She understood the look. She didn't have anything useful to tell him. The broken oven happened on a Thursday. The convection unit on the secondary oven, the one they used for the afternoon pastry batches, failed at 2 in the afternoon with a grinding mechanical complaint, and then simply stopped. Emily spent 20 minutes on the phone with 2 different appliance repair services before she understood that the earliest anyone could come was the following Tuesday, and that the likely cost of the repair would land somewhere between painful and catastrophic. She hung up the phone and pressed her palm flat against the cool metal side of the dead oven and breathed. She went back out front. Dominic was at his table. He had been there since 10. He had not left early on Thursdays for 3 weeks. She didn't say anything to him. She served the 2 o'clock customers, redirected the afternoon baking to the primary oven at reduced capacity, and started mentally reconfiguring the rest of the week's production schedule. Her father came out twice and stood next to the dead oven with his arms crossed, looking at it the way men of his generation looked at broken things, with a mix of fury and grief that had no useful outlet. The next morning, a repair technician arrived at 7 a.m. Emily hadn't called anyone. The technician was young and efficient and had the oven running by 9:30. When Emily asked for the invoice, he told her it had already been settled. She stood in the kitchen with the invoice form in her hand. She went out front. Dominic was at his table. Black coffee. Plain roll. "The oven," she said. She set the invoice on the table in front of him. He glanced at it briefly. Old belt and a seized fan motor. Common problem with that model after 7 years. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No," he said. He picked up his coffee. Emily put both hands flat on the table. Not aggressive, just grounded, the way she stood when she needed to say something true and needed her body to back her up. "I don't want to be in your debt." He set the coffee down. He looked at her directly, and she had been in the bakery with him enough mornings now to understand that this was how he looked when he was being fully honest, without the half-distance that he maintained in most interactions. "You're not," he said. "An oven that doesn't work is bad for the bakery. The bakery not doing well is bad for the building. The building doing well is my business." She studied him. "That's the whole reason," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but a slight movement around the eyes that might have been amusement at being caught out in something small. "That's the reason I'm comfortable saying out loud," he said. Emily straightened. She picked the invoice up off his table. She stood there for one more moment. "Thank you," she said. She meant it and hated that she meant it simultaneously, because gratitude toward this man was a complicated thing to carry around, and she was already carrying enough complicated things. She went back behind the counter. She didn't look at him again for the rest of the morning, but she was acutely aware of exactly when he stood up, pushed in his chair, and left. The flour supplier's name was Gene Mastro, and he had been overcharging the Hartleys for 11 years. Emily knew this in the abstract. She had known for a long time that his prices ran higher than the market, and she had tried twice to switch suppliers and been met with sudden delivery problems, product quality issues, and in one case a phone call from Gene himself that managed to be entirely pleasant on the surface and deeply threatening underneath. Brooklyn had its own ecosystem of small commercial pressures, and Jean was part of it. He was unpleasant and petty, and he had leverage, and Emily had chosen to absorb the cost rather than fight a battle she couldn't win. In the third week of November, Jean called the bakery and offered a new contract. The prices were 17% below what they had been charging. Delivery twice weekly, guaranteed, no explanation offered. Emily took the call at the counter and wrote the numbers down on the back of an order slip, and when she hung up, she stood very still for a moment. She didn't ask Dominic about it directly. Instead, the next morning, when he was 2 cups into his coffee, and the bakery had emptied out to just the 2 of them, and her father sounds from the kitchen, she said without preamble, "Jean Mastro called yesterday." Dominic looked up from whatever he had been thinking about. "Did he?" "New contract, much better terms." "Good," he said. "Did you talk to him?" A pause. Not the pause of someone deciding whether to lie. More the pause of someone deciding how precisely to be honest. "I may have mentioned, in passing, that certain property lease arrangements in his area of business were under review." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You can't just fix things," she said. "I didn't fix anything, I had a conversation. What Jean Mastro does with information is his own business." "That's a very careful way of describing what you did." "I'm a careful man," Dominic said. "I noticed." She refilled his coffee without being asked, because it was empty and because the gesture was easier than the sentence she couldn't quite form. The one about how his version of careful looked, from the outside, a lot like someone paying attention to details that nobody had asked him to pay attention to. Nobody had ever paid that kind of attention to her, not in any sustained way, not without wanting something specific and legible in return. Ryan used to notice things, in the early years. Then he got busy noticing other things. She didn't say any of that. She capped the carafe and went back behind the counter. She ran into Ryan on a Wednesday afternoon in December. She had gone to the hardware store 2 blocks over for replacement gaskets for the proofing cabinet, and she came out with a paper bag and nearly walked directly into him on the sidewalk. He was with Charlotte. She knew immediately from the description she had assembled in her head from the photograph, though the real Charlotte was taller than she had expected, and better looking in the way that people who have never had to worry about money sometimes are, the kind of beauty that came from good sleep and no visible anxiety. Ryan stopped. The 3 of them stood on the sidewalk. "Emily," Ryan said. He said it like she was a mildly surprising weather event, like she was something he would have to account for briefly and then step around. "Ryan." She kept her voice level. It wasn't hard. She had had 2 months. His eyes moved to the paper bag in her hand, then to the bakery down the block, visible from where they stood. Something moved across his face. Not guilt, not quite. Something closer to relief at finding her exactly where he had left her, as though the fact of her continuity in this specific geography confirmed something he needed confirmed. "How's the bakery?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Good, actually." Charlotte said nothing. She had the expression of a woman who had been briefed on this particular name and was handling the briefing with practiced neutral grace. "We're in the area looking at venues," Ryan said. His voice had developed a quality she didn't remember from 5 years, a slight broadening of his vowels, a studied casualness that came from spending time in rooms with people who expected a certain performance. "The gala is in February. The Kingsley event." He said Kingsley event the way a person says something they have been practicing saying. "That sounds nice," Emily said. A moment passed between them that contained approximately 4 different conversations that none of them were going to have on a sidewalk. Then Ryan's eyes moved past her toward the bakery, and she watched him notice, just register, briefly, a dark jacket visible through the window at the corner table. "You have someone in," he said. "I usually do," Emily said. "It's a bakery." She said goodbye. She walked back to the bakery. She didn't look back to see if he watched her go, because looking back was something she had decided, quietly and without ceremony, to be finished with. Ryan looked up. Dominic Callahan that night. He had a good laptop and a fast connection, and the particular focused energy of a man who has seen something he doesn't understand and cannot let it alone. He found the public records first, the property holdings, the LLC registrations, the commercial leasing entities that mapped across South Brooklyn and Red Hook, and parts of the waterfront that Ryan had been learning to think about in terms of the Kingsley shipping infrastructure. He found the local news mentions, sparse and carefully uninformative. He found a financial publication profile from 3 years ago that described Callahan as a significant and largely opaque figure in Brooklyn commercial real estate, and got no further than that before hitting a wall of careful corporate structuring. He sat back. He pulled up the Kingsley operational files. He had access now, partial access, the kind that William granted to people he was evaluating without advertising that he was evaluating them. He cross-referenced. The first match appeared in 12 minutes. By the end of the hour, he had found 6 more. Warehouse leasing agreements, freight corridor access deals, storage facility contracts that 3 Kingsley subsidiaries depended on for their East Coast operations. All of them, traced through 2 or 3 layers of corporate structure, led back to entities controlled by or associated with Dominic Callahan. Ryan stared at the screen. He was a smart man. That had always been true. His ambition outran his patience, and his patience outran his loyalty, but his intelligence was genuine. And right now his intelligence was telling him something very clear and very cold. The man sitting at Emily Hartley's corner table was not simply a local real estate operator. He was structurally embedded in the commercial infrastructure that the Kingsley empire depended on in ways that William Kingsley either didn't fully know or had chosen not to fully examine. And that man was, for reasons Ryan could not yet determine, choosing to spend his mornings in a small Brooklyn bakery with a woman Ryan had discarded. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he called his assistant and scheduled a meeting with Dominic Callahan's office for the following week. The meeting request came through the standard channel. An email to Dominic's office address from an assistant Ryan Prescott employed, requesting 30 minutes to discuss potential business synergies related to the Kingsley Group's Brooklyn operations. Dominic read the email at his desk on a Friday afternoon. He read it twice. He set it aside and did not respond immediately. He thought about Emily instead, the way she had looked at him when he said, "That's the reason I'm comfortable saying out loud," and how she had stood there processing it with that particular stillness of hers, the one that wasn't passivity but was something more like very controlled attention. He had been around careful people his entire life. They were usually careful because they were afraid or because they were calculating something. Emily was careful the way a person was careful when they had learned that being careless cost things they couldn't afford to lose. He confirmed the meeting for Tuesday at 2. Ryan arrived at the Red Hook office building 8 minutes early, which was the kind of thing he did now. Arrived at the precise leading edge of acceptable timing to demonstrate seriousness without appearing anxious. He wore the charcoal suit. He had a folio with printed talking points that he had drafted and redrafted the night before. The woman at the front desk took his name. The man in the dark jacket led him down the hall. Ryan sat in the waiting room and kept his breathing even and reminded himself that he was representing Kingsley interests, that William had agreed this preliminary conversation was reasonable, that he had every right to be in this room. When he was shown in, Dominic was sitting behind the desk this time. He did not stand. He looked at Ryan with an expression that contained no particular warmth and no particular hostility. The same flat attentiveness that Ryan had spent 6 weeks trying to categorize and had finally placed somewhere near the expression of a man who plays chess seriously and is watching someone else's opening move. "Mr. Prescott," Dominic said. "Mr. Callahan, thank you for your time." Ryan settled into the chair, set the folio on his knee. "I'm working with the Kingsley Group on their Brooklyn expansion strategy and in reviewing their existing operational infrastructure. I know what the Kingsley warehouses use," Dominic said. "I know which freight corridors run through my properties. You don't need to explain the infrastructure." Ryan stopped, recalibrated. "Then you understand why a conversation about the renewal terms on those agreements is relevant." "Several of those agreements expire in the spring," Dominic said. "I'm aware. The Kingsley Group is very interested in securing long-term stability on those contracts." Dominic looked at him for a moment that was slightly too long to be comfortable. "Most people who want something specific come to this office and say the specific thing they want." Ryan felt his jaw tighten. He kept his face smooth. "I want to open a conversation about the renewal negotiations, on William Kingsley's behalf. William Kingsley can contact my office directly. I'm his representative on this." "That may be," Dominic said, and the way he said it, not dismissive, just precise, made something cold move through Ryan's chest because it communicated, without any aggression, A complete absence of deference. Ryan set the folio aside. A decision. He had prepared for this possibility. The direct conversation, unscripted. There may also be a personal dimension to this meeting, he said. He kept his voice measured. I'm aware that you've become a presence at Hartley's bakery. Emily Hartley and I have a shared history. The room changed. It didn't change dramatically. Nothing in Dominic's posture shifted. No expression crossed his face that an observer could point to. But something altered in the quality of the attention he was giving Ryan, and Ryan felt it the way you felt a change in air pressure before something broke open in the weather. Emily Hartley, Dominic said, is the owner of a business in one of my properties. He said it evenly. Is there something else you meant to say about her? Ryan heard precisely what he was being told. He heard the way Dominic had not asked what kind of shared history and had not expressed curiosity or surprise or any of the responses that would have indicated he was on uncertain ground. He heard the complete steadiness in Dominic's voice. He also heard, underneath that steadiness, something that didn't have a name, but that made the back of Ryan's throat go dry. I just thought transparency was appropriate, Ryan said. His voice came out level. He was proud of that. Transparency is generally useful, Dominic said, when the information being shared is relevant. The meeting ended 12 minutes later. Ryan walked out having secured precisely nothing. No commitments on the lease renewals. No warmth. No indication that his connection to the Kingsley name had produced any meaningful leverage. He stood on the sidewalk outside the building in the December cold and stared at the street. He was not a man who admitted fear readily. But standing there, he recognized what he was feeling with enough self-awareness to name it accurately, even if only to himself. Dominic Callahan had sat in that office and looked at Ryan the way Ryan had looked at the operational spreadsheets 3 weeks ago, cataloging, cross-referencing, determining what was actually there and what was just a surface presentation. And Ryan understood, with a cold clarity that no amount of tailored suits or Kingsley business cards could soften, that whatever he had assumed was his position in this city's hierarchy of consequence had just been quietly and thoroughly revised. He drove back to Charlotte's family's townhouse in Carroll Gardens, and he sat in the car in front of it for a while before he went inside. And he thought about the corner table and the black coffee and the way Emily had walked back into her bakery without looking back. And then, because Ryan Prescott had always been, at his core, a man who mistook recklessness for courage when he was afraid, he started planning the gala invitation. He would invite Emily. He would invite her into the world he had chosen instead of her, and he would let her see it. The guests, the rooms, the version of himself that Charlotte's money had made possible, and he would watch her understand finally and completely what she had lost. It didn't occur to him, not until much later, that he was about to invite the one variable he couldn't control into the most important room of his new life. Some men, when they're drowning, reach for the thing closest to them, without checking first whether it's an anchor. Ryan sent the invitation the following morning. He had it hand-delivered to Hartley's bakery in an ivory envelope with the Kingsley family crest embossed on the flap. Emily was alone in the bakery when it arrived. Her father had gone to his back appointment. The delivery man set it on the counter and left without waiting for a response. She stood at the counter and held the envelope for a moment, feeling its weight, the quality of the paper, the specific texture of something designed to make the recipient feel the gap between what they were and what was being offered. She opened it. She read it. She set it down on the counter and looked at the corner table. Well, empty today, a Tuesday, one of the 2 days a week when Dominic didn't come in. She picked up her phone. She almost put it back down. Then she called the number she had for his office and asked, when the assistant answered, whether Mr. Callahan was available. He came on the line in under a minute. Emily, he said. She had not given her last name. The assistant had simply known. She filed that away. I received an invitation, she said, to the Kingsley Engagement Gala. In February. Ryan Prescott invited me. Silence on the line. Not an empty silence, a thinking one. I'd like you to come with me, she said. She said it the way she'd said everything to him that mattered, directly, without performance. Not to make a point, not to do anything to Ryan, She stopped, steadied herself. I want you there. The silence stretched another moment. All right, Dominic said, 3 syllables, completely level. And underneath them, if you were listening for it, and Emily was, she was absolutely listening, Something that sounded, very quietly, like the first word of a sentence neither of them knew yet how to finish. She hung up the phone. She stood in the empty bakery in the winter light, and the corner table sat in the corner, and the flour on her hands was already drying, and somewhere in Carroll Gardens, Ryan Prescott had just made the last miscalculation of his carefully constructed new life. The ivory envelope sat on the kitchen table for 3 days. Emily didn't throw it away, and she didn't respond to it, and both of those facts told her something about herself that she wasn't entirely comfortable examining. She moved around it the way you moved around furniture you'd bumped in the dark, carefully, with a specific awareness of exactly where it was at all times. Her father saw it on the second day. He picked it up, read the front, set it back down without opening it. He didn't ask. He was a man who understood that some things needed to be left alone until the person carrying them was ready to set them down themselves. On the third night, Emily sat at the kitchen table after closing and looked at it directly. Ryan had sent it by hand delivery. That was the detail she kept returning to. He could have texted. He could have emailed. He had her number. She had never blocked it, which was its own admission. Instead, he had paid someone to physically carry an envelope with a wax-adjacent embossed crest on the flap through Brooklyn streets and set it on her counter. That was a performance. That was a man constructing a moment rather than making a gesture. She knew the difference because she had spent 5 years watching Ryan construct moments. The elaborate anniversary dinner in the first year. The way he had proposed, publicly, in a restaurant full of people who were strangers to both of them, so that the yes was less a choice than a stage direction. The way he photographed every significant occasion before he had fully inhabited it, as though the evidence of the experience mattered more than the experience itself. She loved him anyway. That was the part she was still metabolizing. Not the betrayal, but her own sustained willingness to love someone whose primary audience had always been himself. She picked up her phone and called Dominic. She had already told herself the reason she was inviting him. She wanted to go. She refused to let Ryan determine which rooms she felt she belonged in, and she wanted someone beside her who would not require managing. All of that was true. She held on to all of it. But when he said all right in that level, unhurried way of his, and she hung up the phone, she sat in the kitchen for a long time and did not look at the envelope at all. She looked at the corner table through the kitchen doorway. Visible from where she sat, the bakery unlocked still, the chairs all up on the tables except that one. Always that one. She had stopped putting the chair up in the evenings because it felt, at some point she couldn't precisely identify, like the wrong thing to do. She went to bed. She still didn't know what she was walking into. She would know soon. January arrived with the specific hostility that January in Brooklyn reserved for people who had already had difficult years. The cold was not dramatic, no blizzard, no event. Just a sustained gray pressure that settled over the borough like something that had decided to stay. The bakery's old windows let in drafts along the bottom seams, and Emily had stuffed them with weather stripping twice and was losing the argument. The heat bill climbed. She adjusted the production schedule to run the ovens longer in the early morning because the residual warmth did double duty. Dominic noticed the draft. He had moved, sometime in the first week of January, from sitting at the corner table in his jacket to sitting at the corner table with a wool overcoat folded over the back of the adjacent chair, which meant he was staying longer before the room warmed up enough to take it off. He didn't say anything about the windows. He didn't arrange for anyone to come fix them. Emily noticed that he didn't. And the noticing meant something, that she had been waiting to see if he would, that she had a complicated readiness to feel both grateful and cornered if he did. He was learning her, not intrusively. He was simply paying the kind of attention that accumulated over time into an accurate picture of a person, and he had the discipline not to act on everything he observed. That restraint was unusual enough that she found herself cataloging it the way she cataloged everything that required her to update a prior assumption. She brought his coffee one morning without being asked, which she had been doing for 2 weeks by then. She set it down and remained standing. "The gala is in 6 weeks," she said. He looked up. "I know. I want to be clear about something before then." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, which she also had been doing more frequently. Not every morning, but enough that it had become a thing that happened rather than a thing she decided. "I'm not going to use you as a prop. Whatever Ryan thinks he's engineering by inviting me, I'm not interested in playing the part he wrote for me." Dominic's hands were wrapped around his coffee cup. He had large hands, she had noticed. Not soft, despite the office and the management layer his life had acquired. What part did he write? The woman who shows up to be pitied, Emily said, who walks into that room and looks around at what she lost and is quietly destroyed by it. That's the role he invited. She looked at Dominic steadily. I'm not playing it. I didn't think you were, he said. I wanted to say it out loud. He studied her. Why? She thought about it honestly. Because saying it out loud makes it more true. Something in his expression shifted, that almost movement around the eyes that she had come to read as the closest he came to showing that something had landed. What do you want the evening to be? He asked. I want to walk in, Emily said, and be myself in that room without apologizing for it. He was quiet for a moment, then, that's manageable. She almost smiled. High praise. I'm careful with praise, he said. It means more that way. She got up. She refilled his coffee. She went back behind the counter and started the morning's second batch of rolls, and the bakery warmed slowly around both of them, and the draft from the windows kept coming in along the bottom seam, and neither of them mentioned it, and the morning passed, the way mornings had begun to pass between them, without needing to be explained. Ryan came to the bakery on a Thursday in the second week of January, and he didn't come for coffee. Emily saw him through the window before he came in, the dark coat, the particular set of his shoulders that she recognized from 5 years of watching him approach things he was nervous about while refusing to look nervous. She kept doing what she was doing, which was restocking the display case with the afternoon's first round of almond pastries. She heard the bell. She didn't turn. Emily. She turned. He was standing in the middle of the bakery floor. No Charlotte. No assistant. He had the look of a man who had talked himself into something on the drive over and was now contending with the reality of actually being in the room. Ryan. She kept her hands moving, set another pastry. You want something, or are you just stopping by? I wanted to make sure you got the invitation. I got it. A pause. Are you coming? She looked at him then, fully. He looked, she thought, like a man who had bought a suit that fit him well and was still slightly surprised by his own reflection. The Kingsley world had agreed with his exterior. She could see the toll it was taking on everything underneath. I'm coming, she said. Something moved across his face. Satisfaction first, quick, involuntary. And then, immediately beneath it, something more complicated that he tried to cover with a smile. Good. I'm glad. There shouldn't be... there's no reason for things to be uncomfortable, she offered. Yeah. They're not, she said. Uncomfortable. For me. He registered that. She watched him register it and not know what to do with it. Ryan had always been a man who navigated by other people's emotions, who watched your face to understand where he stood, who calibrated his confidence against your uncertainty. She had given him a decade of readable reactions. He didn't know what to do with a face that gave him nothing to work with. Who are you bringing? He asked. He tried to make it casual. He didn't entirely succeed. A friend, she said. He waited. She didn't elaborate. That was its own form of information, and she watched him absorb it and decide not to ask further, which was the first intelligent decision he had made since walking in. Well, he said, I'll see you there. He straightened his coat. It's a good event. The venue it's a great space. William really... He stopped. He was name-dropping to a woman who had known him before he knew William's name, and he heard himself doing it. I'll see you there, he said again. See you there, Emily said. He left. She set down the pastry she was holding and looked at the empty corner table. Her father appeared in the pass-through. He had clearly been listening. He said nothing for a moment. You all right? He asked finally. I'm fine, she said. You need to take the afternoon off? No. She picked up the next pastry. I need to finish the case. He nodded. Disappeared back into the kitchen. She heard him moving around in there. The specific sounds of her father occupying a space he had occupied for 30 years. The sounds she had grown up with. The sounds that had been the constant architecture of her entire life. And she finished restocking the case and did not think about Ryan Prescott for the rest of the afternoon. She thought about him that night. She couldn't help it. Not with longing. That was gone. And she trusted its goneness in the way you trusted the healing of a wound you had watched close over. But with a kind of careful analytical attention, The way you looked at a thing that had once had enormous power over you and tried to understand exactly how and why it had. She had loved a performance. That was the clearest way she could put it. Ryan had been performing a version of himself that she had believed was the real thing, and the performance had been good enough and she had been willing enough that it had taken 5 years to understand the difference. She didn't blame herself for that entirely. People believed in the things they wanted to be true. That was human. That was what made them vulnerable and also what made them capable of loving things at all. What she blamed herself for, quietly, not destructively, with the specific accountability of a person who had decided to learn from a thing rather than be flattened by it, was ignoring the signals. The way he had started photographing their life together rather than living in it. The way he had stopped asking about the bakery, gradually, incrementally, until he was no longer asking at all. The way he had talked about the future in terms of what he was going to do. Rarely almost never what she was going to do. She had filled in the space he left with assumptions. She had assumed his ambitions included her. That was her mistake, and it was a learnable one. She was learning it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late January, and it came from a number she didn't recognize, and she almost didn't pick up. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Is this Emily Hartley?" The voice was a woman's, professional, slightly tight. "Yes. My name is Patricia Sue. I'm Charlotte Kingsley's personal assistant." A pause. "Charlotte would like to meet with you, if you're willing, this week, if possible." Emily stood behind the counter of the empty bakery. It was 8:15 between the early rush and the mid-morning, and looked at the corner table where Dominic would arrive in approximately 40 minutes. "What does she want to meet about?" Emily asked. Charlotte would prefer to explain in person. Another pause. "She's aware that her engagement to Ryan Prescott is contextually complicated for you. She wants you to know the request is genuine and not adversarial." Emily thought for a moment. "Tomorrow," she said. 11 o'clock. She can come here." A beat. Perhaps the assistant had expected to name a location. "I'll let her know." What? Charlotte Kingsley arrived at 11 the next morning with no assistant and no visible security, which surprised Emily more than the meeting request itself had. She was tall in person, dark-haired, and moved through the bakery door with the unconscious ease of a woman who had never needed to calculate whether she fit in a room. She wore a camel coat and flat boots, and looked, to Emily's unguarded assessment, like someone who was tired. She sat across from Emily at the corner table. Emily had brought 2 coffees without asking because it seemed correct, and Charlotte wrapped both hands around the cup without drinking from it. "I know this is strange," Charlotte said. "A little," Emily said. Charlotte looked at her directly. She had that quality some very wealthy people had. Not arrogance, but the directness of someone who had never needed to perform accessibility. She was simply there. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me if it's too much. I'll leave if you say so." "Ask," Emily said. Charlotte's hands tightened briefly on the coffee cup. "Ryan talks about you, not frequently, and not the way that sounds, not sentimentally, but when things come up, business things, Brooklyn things. He mentions you in contexts where you don't quite fit, and the way he mentions you—" She stopped, considered. "I'm trying to understand what kind of person he is. I think you might know in ways that I don't." Emily looked at her for a long moment. "You're asking me if he's a good person," Emily said. "I'm asking if he's honest," Charlotte said. "There's a difference." That distinction, that Charlotte drew that specific distinction and not a different one, told Emily something. "Why now?" Emily asked. "The gala is in 3 weeks." Charlotte's jaw shifted slightly. "Because my father had a conversation with someone recently that made him look more carefully at Ryan's role in certain business discussions. And some things Ryan told us about contacts, about relationships, about what he could bring to the table. Some of those things are not consistent with what my father is finding." Emily kept her face very still. "Ryan came to see Dominic Callahan," Emily said. It wasn't a question. She had known since the morning Dominic had been 30 minutes later than usual to the bakery and had arrived with a specific quality of quiet that meant he had been managing something. Charlotte looked at her. "You know Dominic Callahan?" "He's a regular customer." Charlotte absorbed this slowly, visibly, the way a very intelligent person absorbed information that forced them to rearrange things they thought they already understood. Ryan presented himself to my father as someone who had an existing relationship with Callahan, an established rapport that would be useful in the lease renewal conversations. Emily said nothing. That's not accurate, Charlotte said. It was not a question either. I can't speak to what Ryan told your father, Emily said carefully. You don't have to. Charlotte looked down at the coffee. He tried to leverage a connection he doesn't have, to impress a man he can't impress, in order to secure a business outcome he can't deliver. She said it flatly, like she was reading from a document, like she had been turning the sentences over for days and had finally gotten them into a form she could say out loud. That's what happened. Emily looked at the woman across from her. This woman who had everything the world considered valuable and who was sitting in a Brooklyn bakery at 11 in the morning, exhausted and straight-backed, and trying to determine if the man she was engaged to was someone she actually knew. Emily recognized the specific texture of that question. She had lived inside it for the better part of a year before the text arrived and resolved it the ugly way. Charlotte, she said, what do you want me to tell you? Charlotte looked at her. Her eyes were dry. She was holding herself together with the practiced discipline of someone who had been raised to hold themselves together in public spaces, regardless of what was happening. I want you to tell me what you know about who he is. Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ryan is smart. He's genuinely smart, and he works hard. And when he's invested in something, he can make you feel like the most important thing in the room. She chose each word precisely. But what he's invested in is always, underneath everything else, himself. His next position, his next credential, the version of his future that makes the best argument for his own importance. She paused. I was useful to that for a while. Then I wasn't. I think that's why he left. Charlotte held very still. I don't know what he told your father, Emily continued, or what he's promised, or exactly which things are true and which things are the story he needed to tell to get into the rooms he wanted. But I know him well enough to tell you, if something he said doesn't hold up when you look at it carefully, that's not an exception. That's the pattern. The bakery was quiet around them. Her father was in the kitchen. A couple sat near the window. The radiator ticked. Charlotte said, He invited you to the gala. Yes. Why? Emily looked at her steadily. Because he wants me to watch him in that world. He wants me to see what I lost. Something moved across Charlotte's face. It was not quite anger. It was the specific expression of a woman who had just confirmed a thing she had been hoping to disprove. She lifted the coffee and drank from it for the first time. They sat together for another 20 minutes. Not about Ryan. They had said what needed saying about Ryan. They talked about the bakery briefly, and Charlotte asked intelligent questions about the production process and listened to the answers with genuine attention. When she left, she paused at the door. Thank you, she said, for being honest. I've been trying to practice it, Emily said. Charlotte left. Emily stood at the counter and looked at the corner table where 2 coffee cups were sitting. Then she looked at the door. She called Dominic's number. He picked up on the second ring. Charlotte Kingsley came to see me this morning, she said. A pause. Careful. I know. You knew she was coming? I knew she had questions about Ryan's claims. I didn't arrange the meeting. His voice was level. She came to you on her own. Emily leaned against the counter. What did Ryan tell William? Another pause. Longer. He implied an existing relationship with my organization, suggested he could facilitate the renewal negotiations. Did William believe him? William is a careful man. He made some calls. The silence that followed had weight in it. He's been making calls for about 2 weeks. Emily closed her eyes briefly. The shape of it was coming clear now. Ryan walking into that Red Hook office, using Dominic's name, using Emily's name, constructing a version of his connections that he didn't have in order to purchase standing in a world that was deciding whether to accept him, using everything and everyone as material for the story he was trying to tell about himself. He's going to be humiliated, she said, not with satisfaction, with the flat inevitability of something that had already been set in motion. Yes, Dominic said, at the gala. If he makes it to the gala, a pause. William is not a patient man when he believes he's been misled. Emily opened her eyes. The bakery was bright with the winter light coming through the old windows, drafts along the bottom seam, The couple at the table near the window leaning toward each other. Her father's sounds from the kitchen. All of it ordinary. All of it hers. "Are we still going?" she asked. "Do you want to go?" he said. She thought about it honestly. She thought about Charlotte's face, the exhaustion, the held-together posture, the specific grief of a woman who was realizing she had been cast in someone else's plan without her knowledge. She thought about Ryan standing in this bakery looking at her like she was geography, like she was a place he had passed through on the way to somewhere else. "Yes," she said. "I want to go." "Then we're going," Dominic said. She hung up the phone and looked at the corner table again. The 2 cups Charlotte had left were still there. She went over and collected them, and she carried them back behind the counter, and she ran the water and started washing. The day before the gala, something happened that Emily had not anticipated, and that changed the shape of the evening before it began. She was closing up alone. Her father had gone home early, his back making the end of the week difficult. When the bell above the door rang at 7:15 and a man she had never seen before came in. He was older, heavy-set, with the specific kind of confidence that lived in the shoulders of men who had spent a long time being listened to. He wore a good coat, and he looked around the bakery briefly before settling his attention on Emily with the directness of someone who did not deal in preliminary courtesies. "Ms. Hartley," he said, "I'm William Kingsley." She set down the cloth she was holding. He didn't wait for her to respond. "I'll be quick. I know you're closing." He came to the counter and stood across from her with his hands in his coat pockets. "Charlotte told me about your conversation. Summarized it, anyway." He looked at her with the flat assessing look of a man who had evaluated people for profit for 40 years. "I want to know one thing." "What?" she said. "Callahan." He said the name the way everyone in Brooklyn said it, with that specific careful weight. "How well do you know him?" Emily looked at William Kingsley across her grandfather's counter. "Well enough," she said. He studied her. "He's coming to the gala with you." "Yes." "Did you ask him, or did he offer?" "I asked him." William was quiet for a moment. He looked at the corner table, then back at her. "I've been trying to reach Callahan directly about the renewals for 10 days. He hasn't returned my calls." He said it without heat, as a fact. "Ryan led me to believe he had a channel." "He doesn't," Emily said. "I'm aware of that now." Something moved across William's face. Not embarrassment, but the adjacent thing. The expression of a man who was angry at himself for a mistake in judgment. "I'm going to be dealing with this situation at my own engagement party, whatever that situation turns out to be." "I'm sorry," Emily said, and she meant it. Not for Ryan, but for the position William was in, for Charlotte's face that morning. He looked at her sharply. "Don't be sorry for me. I'm managing." He straightened. "I came here because Charlotte trusts you for reasons I can't fully account for, and because I want to know what kind of evening tomorrow is going to be before I walk into it." Emily looked at him steadily. "That depends on Ryan," she said. William's jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "I've come to understand that." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "The bakery. It's been here 30 years?" "My grandfather opened it." He looked around the room. The worn wooden floor, the glass display case, the old oven just visible through the pass-through, the corner table with its single chair still down on the floor. "Good bones," he said. It was, from a man like William Kingsley, something more than a compliment about a building. He left. Emily locked the door behind him and stood in the empty bakery for a long time. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about walking into a room full of people who knew each other's names and each other's net worth, and had organized themselves accordingly. She thought about Ryan's face when the doors opened. She thought about Charlotte's exhausted, held-together posture. She thought about Dominic saying all right on the phone, simply, without theater. She went upstairs. She laid out the dress she had bought 3 weeks ago, dark blue, not elaborate, the kind of dress that said, "I was not trying to impress you in a room full of people trying to impress each other." She had bought it on her lunch break and brought it home in a paper bag and not told anyone. She set her alarm for 4:30. The ovens needed to be started. Tomorrow was a long day. She was going to be ready for it. She turned out the light. In Carroll Gardens, Ryan Prescott was awake, going over his talking points for a room that was already rearranging itself around him in ways he couldn't see, toward an outcome he had engineered without understanding what he was actually building. The gala was in 18 hours. and not a single person walking into it would emerge unchanged. The morning of the gala, Emily was at the ovens by 4:30. She didn't need to be. She had coverage. Dara, her most reliable morning person, was coming in at 5. But Emily had slept badly, not from dread but from something closer to a specific alertness, the kind her body produced when it understood that a day was going to matter before her mind had fully processed why. So she got up in the dark and went downstairs and started the ovens, and stood in the warm smell of the bakery coming to life, and let the familiarity of it settle something in her chest. Her father found her there at 6. He came downstairs in his robe with his reading glasses already on, even though there was nothing to read, which meant he had also slept badly and had come down because the kitchen sounds told him where she was. He stood in the doorway between the back kitchen and the front and looked at her for a moment. "You eat anything?" he said. "Not yet." He disappeared back into the kitchen and came back with 2 plates. Eggs, toast, the slightly overcooked bacon he always made because he had never fully trusted undercooked bacon and probably never would. He set both plates on the prep counter, and they stood and ate in the warm bakery kitchen before opening, the way they had done on difficult mornings her entire life. Quietly, side by side, not making the difficulty bigger than it needed to be by talking about it. "What time does it start?" he asked. 7, she said. "Cocktail hour first, dinner at 8:30. He nodded. He looked at his plate, then, "You want me to say something about all this?" "Not particularly," she said. He nodded again, with the specific respect of a father who had learned, over the course of raising her, that the most useful thing he could offer was often presence rather than opinion. They finished eating. She washed the plates. He went upstairs to get dressed. Before he disappeared entirely, he stopped and said without turning around, "The blue dress. It's the right call." She hadn't told him about the dress. He had seen the paper bag and drawn his conclusions. She almost smiled. "Go to your back appointment," she said. He went. What? Dominic arrived at the bakery at 2 in the afternoon, which was not his usual time. He came in through the front, which was unusual. He had started coming through the side entrance that led directly to the kitchen area, which Emily had not explicitly offered, and he had not explicitly asked about, and which had simply become the arrangement. At some point she couldn't pinpoint. The fact that he came through the front door today meant something. She wasn't sure what yet. He was not in his usual dark jacket. He wore a suit, charcoal, well-made, the kind of clothing that didn't announce itself but that a certain kind of person would recognize immediately. He looked different, not uncomfortable. Dominic Callahan had clearly spent time in rooms that required this particular presentation. But different in the way that a person looks when you've been used to seeing them in one context and suddenly they appear in another. And both versions are real, but you've only known one of them. Emily was behind the counter. She was wearing her work clothes still, her apron on, flour on her hands. She looked at him. He looked at her. "You're early," she said. "I had things to deal with this morning that finished early." She looked at the suit. "You look—" She stopped, started again. "Different." "So will you," he said. "In a few hours." She went back to the tray she was working on. "You can wait in the kitchen. My father made a thing of coffee." "I'll wait here," he said. He came around to the counter, not behind it, but to the near side, where there was a stool that suppliers sometimes used when they came to discuss orders. He sat on it. He watched her work. This should have been uncomfortable. By any normal measure, a man in a charcoal suit sitting on a supply stool watching her fill pastry molds should have been at minimum awkward. It wasn't. He had the quality of very few people she had known. He could occupy a space without demanding that the space conform to his presence. He simply sat there, and she worked, and the afternoon moved around them. "Ryan is going to try something tonight," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Dominic said. "He's going to be angry. William had 2 meetings with his lawyers last week. Charlotte told me." She paused to set a mold aside. "He's losing the infrastructure he thought he had. He's going to be looking for somewhere to put that." "He'll put it toward you," Dominic said. "I know." She reached for the next mold. "I'm not asking you to protect me from it." "I know you're not." She looked at him. "I just need you to be there." He held her gaze. "That's where I'll be," he said. She went back to work. He stayed on the stool. At 3:15, she took off her apron, washed her hands, and went upstairs to change. She told Dara the closing instructions. She told Dara not to let her father eat the leftover almond pastries because his blood sugar had been running high, and he would absolutely eat them if they were left where he could find them. At 4 o'clock, she came back downstairs. Dominic stood up from the stool. The blue dress was not elaborate. It had a clean line and a simple cut, and it was the exact color of late afternoon sky in October. She had put her hair up, not formally but deliberately, in the way she wore it when she needed her hands free and her face visible. She wore her grandmother's earrings, small and dark, which she wore when she needed to feel grounded by something older than herself. She stood at the bottom of the stairs. Dominic looked at her, the way he looked at things he was paying serious attention to. No performance. No studied compliment. Just that flat, complete attention that she had come to understand as one of the most honest things about him. "Ready?" he said. "Ready," she said. He offered his arm at the door. She took it, and they stepped out into the February evening, and the cold came in from the harbor 2 miles away, and the street was lit up with the ordinary Brooklyn evening light, and Emily Hartley walked toward a room she was done being afraid of. The Kingsley Gala was held at a venue in Brooklyn Heights that had been an industrial warehouse in a previous life, and now, with the application of enough money, looked like the platonic ideal of a certain kind of wealth. Exposed brick softened by carefully considered lighting, long tables dressed in white linen, arrangements of white flowers that looked effortless and had cost an amount that would have kept the bakery's heat on for a season. The kind of room that said we can make anything look inevitable. They arrived at 7:20. The car stopped at the venue entrance, and Dominic got out first and offered his hand, and Emily took it and stepped out onto the sidewalk and stood upright in the cold air for exactly 2 seconds before the door opened. She felt the room before she was fully in it. That specific gathering energy, the sound of 40 conversations happening at once, the warmth of bodies and candles and good wine, the particular social pressure of a room full of people who knew each other's names and were checking who had arrived and with whom and in what order. She had been in rooms like this exactly twice in her life, both times with Ryan, both times standing slightly behind him while he worked the space. She was not standing behind anyone tonight. The room registered Dominic before it registered her. She felt it happen. The slight shift in the ambient noise, a few conversations pausing at their edges, heads turning with that specific calibrated social attention that wealthy rooms produced when something worth attending to had entered them. Dominic moved through it without acknowledging it, which was its own form of authority. He was not performing his arrival. He was simply arriving. Emily moved with him. She kept her chin level. She breathed through the first wave of it, the visibility, the social weight, and then something steadied in her chest, and she looked around the room properly and assessed it. There were perhaps 80 guests. Business, primarily. The Kingsley Empire ran on business relationships, with the specific demographic of Brooklyn power that mixed old money comfort with new money intensity. She recognized 3 or 4 faces from newspaper profiles she had seen over the years. She recognized nobody personally. She saw Ryan before he saw her. He was across the room, near the bar, in conversation with 2 men in the particular suits that indicated real estate money. He was animated, gesturing, smiling, performing at full capacity the version of himself that the Kingsley world had been brought in to witness. Charlotte was nearby but not adjacent, talking to a small group of women near the window. And even from this distance, Emily could see the careful management in Charlotte's posture, the way she was holding her evening with 2 hands, keeping it from spilling. Then Ryan turned. He saw Emily first. She watched his face shift, the prepared-to-be gracious expression he had probably arranged for this moment, landing in place like a mask. Then his eyes moved to the person beside her. The mask didn't fall. It did something more complicated. It held its shape while everything behind it rearranged into something she had no name for. He excused himself from the 2 men. He crossed the room. Emily watched him come and kept her face neutral and her shoulders straight and her hand lightly on Dominic's arm, not gripping, just present. "Emily," Ryan arrived. His voice was smooth. He had excellent control. "You made it." "I said I would," she said. His eyes moved to Dominic. Something happened in them. A rapid sequence of calculations, the kind she had watched him perform across a conference table when he was working out how to position himself. He extended his hand. "Ryan Prescott." Dominic shook it. Callahan. One word, nothing performed. The handshake lasted exactly as long as a handshake lasted, and no longer. And in that duration, Ryan's face went through 3 changes that he managed to keep small enough that someone not watching carefully would have missed them. "I didn't realize you two," Ryan started. "Emily invited me," Dominic said. "Right. A recovery." "Well, welcome. The venue is... There's a terrace off the east side if you want the harbor view. They've done something great with Ryan," a voice behind them. William Kingsley had materialized from somewhere to their left with the particular purposeful movement of a large man who was controlling his urgency. He looked at Dominic, and his expression contained a decade of business conducted in rooms like this one, all of it distilled into something very specific and very careful. "Callahan, I'm glad you're here." "Kingsley," Dominic said. His tone was the same as it had been with Ryan. Even, direct, no ornament. "I've been meaning to return your calls." William glanced at Ryan. Something passed between them that Emily caught and Ryan felt. A reorientation of attention, a subtle but absolute shift in who William was addressing as the significant person in this cluster. "I think we should find some time this evening," William said to Dominic, "if that's agreeable." "Later in the evening," Dominic said. "After dinner." "Of course." William looked at Emily. "Ms. Hartley, I'm glad you came." He said it like he meant it, which she believed he did. Then he moved away. Ryan stood very still. He had just watched William Kingsley, the man whose daughter he was marrying, whose empire he was supposed to be helping to navigate, redirect his attention to the man Ryan had implied he could deliver, and speak to that man with a deference and directness that Ryan had been trying to generate for 3 months. Emily looked at Ryan. His jaw was tight. His smile was still there, but it had become load-bearing, the kind of smile that existed to hold other things in place. "You brought him," Ryan said. His voice was low. Under the surface of it, something that wasn't quite controlled. "I told you I was bringing a friend," Emily said. "You could have said what?" He stopped. He looked between the two of them. "This is, Emily, you realize what this looks like." "What does it look like?" He pulled in a breath. Reset. The smile came back up. "Let me find you a drink, both of you. The bar has—" "We're fine," Emily said. She said it gently, without aggression. Just the quiet finality of a woman who knew where she stood and didn't need anything from the man in front of her. The gentleness was, she thought, worse for Ryan than anger would have been. Anger would have given him something to respond to. Ryan looked at her for one moment, really looked, in the way he had stopped looking years ago, seeing her rather than his idea of her. And then he nodded once and moved away. The next hour was a specific kind of difficult, not because anyone was hostile, because it was an hour of the particular social performance of a Kingsley family event, and Emily had to navigate it without armor. She knew nobody, had no context for the relationships in the room, and was aware of being assessed by people who were doing it professionally. She did it anyway. She stood beside Dominic and spoke when she had something to say, and was quiet when she didn't, and looked people in the eye when they were introduced to her and did not pretend to be something she wasn't. What she noticed, people spoke to Dominic with a carefulness that was not fear exactly, but the specific attention that came from knowing they were talking to someone whose judgment mattered. And they looked at her, the woman with him, standing easily, not performing, with a curiosity that gradually warmed into something less calculated. 2 women sought her out specifically after learning she ran the Hartley bakery, one of whom turned out to be from the neighborhood and had been going there since she was a child. She talked about flour varieties and fermentation time and the difference between a properly proofed loaf and one that had been rushed, and the woman listened with genuine interest, and Emily felt the specific pleasure of being in her own expertise in a room that had assumed she didn't have one. Dominic stood nearby during this conversation. He did not interject. He listened to her talk with his coffee in his hand, and she caught him watching her once with an expression she hadn't seen before, something quieter than his usual careful attention, something more like recognition. Ryan watched from across the room for most of the first hour. She could feel it, not with anxiety, but with the specific awareness of someone who had spent 5 years learning to read his tells. He was working the room, working it hard, but his attention kept snagging on her corner of it. Each time she glanced his way, she saw him recalibrate, redirect his energy back to the conversation he was supposed to be in. Charlotte, for her part, moved through the evening with the particular grace of someone managing a very difficult situation with everything they had. She spoke to Emily briefly, warmly, with no performance for the room. She did not look at Ryan more than she had to. Emily understood then, with a clarity she hadn't had before. Charlotte wasn't naive. She had never been naive. She was a woman who had identified the problem and was managing its unraveling with the discipline of someone who would not give anyone, not Ryan, not the guests, not the situation itself, the satisfaction of seeing her break open in public. Emily respected that with a depth that surprised her. Oh. Dinner was seated. Emily found herself at a table of 8 that included 2 Kingsley board members, a shipping attorney, a woman who ran a logistics company out of Red Hook that Emily had heard of, and plus, by some arrangement that had clearly been deliberate, Ryan and Charlotte at the opposite end. Dominic was beside her. The dinner conversation around them moved through the channels that this kind of dinner moved through. Business, mostly, the specific language of people who thought in terms of infrastructure and contracts and the long geometries of commercial relationships. Emily listened more than she spoke. Dominic spoke when addressed and said things that were accurate and brief and contained no wasted language. And she noticed the logistics woman angling her body toward him incrementally throughout the first course in the way that people angled toward sources of real information. The trouble started during the second course. Ryan had been drinking. Not visibly drunk. He had too much control for that. But at the particular level where the control required more maintenance than usual, where the performance cost more effort, and the effort started to show in the tightness around the eyes, and the slightly too quick responses, and the laughter that was 1 degree louder than the conversation warranted. Charlotte was not drinking at all, Emily noticed. She had her water glass and she was working it. Ryan said something to the board member on his right. Emily caught the tail end of it, something about warehouse capacity and the spring expansion, and the board member's response was brief and neutral, the kind of response that indicated he was not engaging with the premise. Ryan pressed. The board member changed the subject. Emily watched Ryan absorb this and file it and redirect, and the redirection brought his attention back down the table to her, and she saw the moment he decided. He leaned forward slightly, addressing the table. The smile was on, but the edges of it were wrong. Emily, I have to say, I'm glad you could make it. It's good to see you doing well. A pause. His voice warmed with something that was not warmth. The bakery holding up okay? I know the market's been tough on the smaller neighborhood spots. The table noticed. Not everyone, but the logistics woman did, and the shipping attorney, and Charlotte, whose hand stopped moving on her cutlery. Emily set down her fork. She took a moment, not to compose herself, she was already composed, but to be certain of what she wanted to say and how she wanted to say it. The bakery's doing well, she said. Her voice was even. Really well, actually. We renegotiated our supply contracts in the fall. Lease terms are solid. Good year. Oh, good. Ryan's voice stayed warm, too warm. I worry, you know. Those neighborhood spots, they work so hard and the margins are just... He shook his head, the gesture of a man expressing concern. Must be a struggle. Ryan, Charlotte said, quietly. Precisely. He didn't look at her. Dominic set down his glass. It was a small movement, a glass placed on a linen tablecloth. There was no sound to it, or almost none, but something in the deliberateness of it, in the stillness that followed, drew the table's attention the way a sound draws attention, because it had that quality. He looked at Ryan. The Hartley building, Dominic said. He said it the way he said everything, without preamble, without theater. Good property, solid foundation. My company has held it for 4 years. He paused. The tenant has been there 30 years. The business is well run, and it services a real community need. That's exactly the kind of commercial tenant that holds a neighborhood's economic structure together. He said it to the table, which meant he said it in front of the board members and the logistics woman and the attorney. He said it about Emily's bakery, in the specific language that this room understood, and the room understood it. Ryan's jaw shifted. Well, of course, Ryan said. I just meant in general, In general, Dominic said. A business that's been operating successfully in the same location for 30 years doesn't need concern. It needs a landlord who recognizes its value. He picked up his glass and drank from it, which it has. The table was quiet for exactly the right amount of time, and then the logistics woman asked Dominic something about freight routing on the East Corridor, and the conversation moved, and Ryan sat at the end of the table, and his face was very still, and Emily looked at her plate and breathed. She reached under the table and found Dominic's hand. She wasn't sure she meant to. Her hand simply moved and found his, and his fingers closed around hers with the same decisive quietness that characterized everything he did, and they sat like that through the rest of the second course while the table talked around them. She let go when the plates were cleared, naturally, without announcement. But the logistics woman had glanced down once, briefly, and Emily thought, all right, that happened. After dinner, the room reorganized into clusters again. Coffee, dessert. The Kingsley families prepared remarks from William about the engagement, brief and warm. Charlotte stood beside her father during the remarks and held her champagne glass and looked at a point in the middle distance with the expression of a woman who had made a decision and had not yet found the moment to act on it. Ryan stood beside Charlotte and smiled at the guests, and his eyes moved to Emily twice during the remarks, and each time they moved away again quickly, like touching something hot. After the remarks, the room fragmented. Emily was talking with the woman from the neighborhood, Miriam, her name was, who had grown up 2 blocks from the bakery and had started buying the sourdough at age 9, when she heard Ryan's voice behind her, lower now, with the particular intensity of a man who had been managing something for 3 hours and was running out of management capacity. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" It was not a question. Emily excused herself from Miriam. She turned. Ryan was close. Too close. The specific proximity of someone who had calculated that physical closeness created a kind of privacy, even in a public room. She stepped back slightly, and he registered it, and his jaw tightened. "I need to understand what you're doing," he said. "I'm at a party," she said. "With him." He looked across the room to where Dominic was standing with William Kingsley and the attorney. The conversation that had been waiting all evening, happening now, unhurried and private. "You know what he is." "I know who he is," Emily said. "Emily." His voice dropped further, under it, and she could hear it. She knew this voice across 5 years. Something that was not anger, but was adjacent to it. Something more like the specific panic of a man watching the structure he has built develop visible cracks. "You had to know what bringing him here would do, to my position with William, to everything I've been working toward here." "Ryan," she said, "stop. I'm serious. Whatever you think—" "I'm not thinking anything about you," she said. She said it clearly and without force. "I'm not doing anything for or against you. I came tonight because I wanted to come. I brought Dominic because I wanted him here." She looked at Ryan directly. "You are not the reason for anything I'm doing. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" He stared at her. "You invited me," she said, "because you wanted me to walk in here and feel small. I know that. You don't have to pretend otherwise." She kept her voice level. "But I don't feel small. I feel fine. And the reason you're upset right now is not because of what I did. It's because of what you did. The things you told William that weren't true. That's not me. That's you." Ryan's face went through several changes. She watched them. The defensiveness, the deflection being assembled, the counterargument being prepared. Then Charlotte's voice behind him. "Ryan." He turned. Charlotte stood 3 feet away. She was not holding her champagne glass anymore. Her hands were at her sides and her face was very composed, and the composure of it was the specific composure of a woman who had made the decision. "I need to talk to you," Charlotte said. "Now, not tomorrow, now." The color in Ryan's face shifted. "Charlotte, my father is going to wrap up his conversation in about 10 minutes, Charlotte said, "and after that he is going to want to speak to us both. So we need to have this conversation before that." She looked at Emily briefly, quickly, not with hostility, not with gratitude, just with the acknowledgement of one woman to another that a thing had run its course. Then she looked back at Ryan. "Please." Ryan looked between Charlotte and Emily. He looked across the room at Dominic and William. He looked at his own hands. He looked like a man standing in the center of a structure he had built that was removing itself from around him beam by beam. He went with Charlotte. Emily watched them cross the room together toward the terrace doors. She watched the doors close behind them. She stood in the center of the Kingsley Gala, in the blue dress, with the harbor somewhere beyond the walls, and the voices of 80 people around her, and the warm light of a room that had been designed to make everything look inevitable. And she breathed. She was not shaking. She was not triumphant. She was simply standing in a room that had tried to tell her she didn't belong here, and she was still standing. Across the room, Dominic looked up from his conversation with William. He found her across 40 feet of warm light and low voices and white linen, the way a person found something they had been keeping track of in their peripheral awareness throughout a long evening. He looked at her for a moment. She looked back. She was all right. He turned back to William, and the conversation continued. She found Miriam again, and they talked for another 20 minutes about sourdough and about what the neighborhood had been in 1987 and what it was now and what it might be in another 10 years. And the conversation was the most real thing that had happened in this room all evening, and Emily held on to it and let it carry her through to the other side. The terrace doors were still closed. William Kingsley looked at them once, from across the room, and then looked away and squared his shoulders and finished his conversation with Dominic, and did not look at the terrace doors again. Some things, when they started to fall, needed to finish falling before anyone could begin building in the cleared ground. The gala carried on around the edges of it, voices and crystal, and the specific polished surface of a world arranged to look permanent, while behind the terrace doors the future that Ryan Prescott had abandoned everything to obtain began its last negotiation with the choices that had made it what it was. Emily did not go near the terrace. She did not need to. The terrace doors opened at 9:47. Emily knew the exact time because she had just checked her phone, not to see if anyone had messaged her, but the reflexive check of a person who needed to know where they were in an evening that had been running on its own logic for the past 3 hours. 9:47. She put the phone away. Ryan came through the doors first. He walked back into the room with the specific quality of a man who has just had something taken from him that he had been certain was his, not stunned, not broken, but moving with the careful deliberateness of someone who is keeping themselves upright through will alone and knows that the will is the only thing between them and the floor. His face was arranged. She had seen him arrange his face before, across 5 years of watching him manage difficult situations, but she had never seen him have to work this hard at it. The arrangement was technically present and fundamentally wrong, like a structure that looked sound from the outside but had already failed at the load-bearing points. Charlotte came through the doors 12 seconds later. The 12 seconds mattered. She had stayed on the terrace for 12 seconds after Ryan came in, and Emily understood what those 12 seconds were. A woman taking the last of what she needed from a private space before she walked back into a public one and finished the evening that she had started. Charlotte moved through the room with the same grace she had moved through it all night, but something in her posture had settled. The careful management was still there, but the quality of it had changed. It was no longer holding something together. It was simply carrying her forward. She found her father within 2 minutes. Emily watched William Kingsley look at his daughter's face and read what was on it with the speed of a man who had been reading difficult situations for 40 years. And she watched his shoulders drop slightly, not in defeat, but in the specific relief of a man who had been waiting for a decision to be made and had just been informed it had been made. He put his hand on Charlotte's arm briefly. She put her hand over his. Then he looked across the room at Ryan. What happened in the next 20 minutes did not happen with the dramatic clarity of a scene from a movie. It happened the way difficult things happened in real rooms between real people who had arrived at a juncture that none of them had fully planned for. Incrementally, quietly, with the specific awkwardness of consequence arriving in real time. William spoke to Ryan privately, in the corner near the service corridor, for approximately 8 minutes. Emily could not hear the conversation. She did not try. She stayed near the center of the room with Miriam, who had enough social sensitivity to keep the conversation moving without pressing on the obvious thing happening 30 feet away. She watched Ryan's face during those 8 minutes. She watched it the way she had watched the letter from the management company, with the steady attention of a woman who needed to understand the exact shape of something difficult so she could figure out what it meant for her life going forward. And what she understood, watching Ryan stand in that corner and receive what William was saying to him, was that she was not watching a man being destroyed. She was watching a man understand, possibly for the first time in any real sense, that the performance he had been giving The version of himself constructed for the purpose of getting what he wanted had come to its natural terminus. He was not destroyed. He would be fine, eventually, in the way that people who were fundamentally equipped with intelligence and ambition and a certain resilience of ego were usually fine eventually. He would recalibrate. He would find another room, another structure, another version of the story that made him the protagonist. People like Ryan always did, but he would not have the Kingsley name attached to it. He would not have the warehouses or the freight corridors or the leases or the introductions. He would not have the charcoal suits that Charlotte's family money had quietly underwritten since October. He would not have the future he had identified and pursued with the focused intensity of someone who had decided long ago that he deserved better than what he had been given. He had just gotten exactly what he deserved instead. William finished what he was saying. He stepped back. He held out his hand. Ryan shook it, automatically, the muscle memory of a man who had shaken thousands of hands. And William walked away from him and did not look back. Ryan stood alone in the corner for a moment. Then he looked across the room and found Emily. She held his gaze. She did not look away, and she did not soften her expression, and she did not harden it. She just looked at him the way she had been learning to look at things that had once had power over her, directly, without either the wound or the satisfaction, with the clear sight of someone who had come through something and arrived on the other side of it. He looked away first. He picked up his jacket from the coat check and left the gala at 10:14 without speaking to Charlotte again that evening. Charlotte did not watch him go. She was talking to a woman near the window, a friend from the look of it, real warmth in the conversation, and she was not performing anything. Emily watched the door close behind him. She let out a breath that she had not known, until it left her, that she had been holding. Dominic found her at 10:30. The gala was winding, guests making their exit gestures, coats reappearing, the volume of the room dropping to a more intimate level. He came to stand beside her near the east wall where the windows looked out over rooftops toward the dark water of the harbor, and he handed her a glass of water because she had been drinking sparkling water all evening, and her last glass had been empty for 40 minutes. She took it. She drank from it. She looked at the harbor through the dark. "How did the conversation with William go?" she asked. "Productively," he said. "The renewals? We'll put something together in the next few weeks. His people will call my people, and there will be several very dull meetings, and eventually there will be agreements that work for both sides." He paused. "That's how it usually works when both sides are operating in good faith. As opposed to when someone claims a channel they don't have." "As opposed to that, yes." She looked at the water in her glass. "Ryan's gone." "I know." "I watched William talk to him." She turned the glass slowly in her hands. "I didn't feel anything I expected to feel." Dominic was quiet, waiting for her to find the rest of the sentence. "I thought I'd feel satisfied," she said. "Or sad. Some version of one of those." She looked at the dark harbor. "I mostly felt tired, not bad tired, just finished, like something that had been running for a long time finally stopped." "That's what it feels like," Dominic said, "when it's actually over." She looked at him. "I was looking out the window too, at the same harbor, and his profile in the party light was the profile of a man who had been in difficult rooms for a long time and had arrived at a point in his life where he no longer needed to pretend they were easy." "How do you know what it feels like?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "I spent 6 years building something with someone who was building something else at the same time," he said, "using the same materials." He didn't look at her. "When it ended, I was ready for the anger and the grief. I wasn't ready for the quiet. It felt wrong, like something was missing." He paused. "It took me a while to understand that what was missing was the tension, and that the tension wasn't something I should have been trying to get back." She absorbed this. In the years she had known him as the corner table, as the black coffee and the plain roll, as the phone call that had returned her lease to something livable, she had received almost nothing like this. Almost nothing personal, unguarded, said simply because it was true. "What happened to her?" Emily asked. "The person who was building something else." "She built it," he said. "Took what she needed, built her thing, moved on. She's in Miami now. Does well." He picked up his own glass. "I learned some useful things." "Like what?" He considered. "Like the difference between someone who is with you and someone who is adjacent to you. They look the same for a long time." Emily looked at the window, at their reflections in the dark glass, her in the blue dress, him in the charcoal suit, both of them slightly overlaid on the harbor beyond. "We should go," she said. "Whenever you're ready." She set her glass on the tray of a passing server. She looked around the room once more, at Charlotte talking with her friend, at William with his hand on another guest's shoulder, at the white tablecloths and the flower arrangements and the careful, expensive light, at the room that had been constructed to make a certain story look inevitable. A different story had happened here tonight. "I'm ready," she said. They didn't speak much in the car going back to Brooklyn, not because anything was unresolved between them, because the evening had been long and had taken something from both of them, and the silence was not empty, but was the specific silence of two people who had been through something together and didn't need to immediately dismantle it into language. He walked her to the bakery door. She had her key out. She stopped with it in her hand and turned. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight." "You didn't need me there," he said. "You'd have been fine." "I know," she said. "That's not why I asked you." He looked at her. The street was quiet. February, late, the cold coming off the harbor in long, slow waves. The bakery windows dark. The sign her grandfather had put up, Hartley's, and the old block letters that her father kept meaning to repaint and never did, catching the streetlight. "I asked you because I wanted you there," she said. "I want to be clear about that. Not as a strategy, not as a counterweight to Ryan, because I wanted you there." She held his gaze. "And I want you to know that I know the difference." He was very still. Then he reached out and took her hand, not the way he had taken it at the gala, the offered hand in a public room, but the way a person took something they were not performing taking. His hand was warm and very solid, and it closed around hers with a care that had nothing careful in the self-protective sense about it. "Go inside," he said. "It's cold." She almost smiled. She let herself almost smile. "Same time tomorrow?" 5:30, he said. "Rolls are ready by 5:30. "Then 5:30, he said. She unlocked the door. She went inside. She heard his car pull away while she was still standing in the dark bakery, not turning the lights on yet, breathing in the smell of the place, flour and yeast and wood, and the specific accumulated warmth of 30 years of mornings. She stood there for a while. Then she went upstairs, and she took off the blue dress carefully and hung it, and she set her grandmother's earrings on the nightstand, and she set her alarm for 4:15, and she went to sleep without any difficulty at all. March arrived. Brooklyn did what Brooklyn did with March. Nothing dramatic, just a slow, grudging lightening of the sky that arrived 15 minutes earlier each week, until one morning you went to start the ovens and noticed that the darkness outside the window was no longer absolute, that there was a seam of gray along the roofline that had not been there a month ago. Emily noticed it on a Tuesday, the second week of March, and stood at the kitchen window with her coffee for an extra minute before she got to work. The lease was signed, not the rolling monthly arrangement that the building's previous management had kept the Hartleys on for the past 8 years, creating a low-level anxiety that had been so persistent Emily had stopped feeling it as anxiety and had just felt it as background weather, a proper long-term agreement, 5 years with a structured extension option, terms that allowed for the reality of what the bakery was. A neighborhood business with consistent revenue and minimal overhead, and a customer base that had been coming through the door since before some of them could reach the display case. Her father had read every page of it twice. Then he had sat at the kitchen table and looked at it in a specific way, not at the document itself, but at some point just beyond it, that Emily recognized as the look he had worn when her mother died, and when Emily got into the business program she had ultimately not gone to, and on the morning after Emily told him Ryan was gone. The look of a man arriving at the far side of something that had been taking up enormous space in his life for so long, that arriving at the far side produced not relief, but a strange, temporary disorientation. Like removing a cast you've worn for a season. The limb is fine, the weight is gone, but for a moment you don't quite know what to do with the lightness. "That's it then," he had said. "That's it," Emily had said. He nodded. He put the kettle on. He asked if she wanted eggs. She had said yes, and they had eaten eggs at the kitchen table, and the bakery was going to be all right, and that was everything it needed to be. She heard about Ryan in pieces, the way you heard about things in Brooklyn, when you had lived there long enough and knew enough people. Not gossip, just information, moving through the neighborhood the way information moved, from person to person, casual, and continuous. He had moved out of Charlotte's family's Carroll Gardens property in the last week of February. He was back in the apartment in Park Slope that he had been subletting while he planned the Kingsley future. His name was no longer associated with the Kingsley shipping expansion in any professional capacity. The engagement, officially, had ended due to mutual decision, and both parties wished each other well, which was the language that wealthy families used when they were being careful about the record. Emily did not seek out any of this information. She did not pursue it, and she did not avoid it. She filed it the way she filed things that were relevant to understanding her own history, but no longer constituted a live concern. The way you filed information about a building you used to work in that you no longer entered. She felt, when she encountered these pieces of information, something she had not expected to feel, and which took her several days to accurately name. It was not satisfaction. It was not pity. Though somewhere underneath it there was a thin layer of something that might have been pity, not for what Ryan had lost, but for the particular loneliness of discovering that the version of yourself you had been performing could not sustain the weight of a real life. That was a terrible thing to discover, and it was happening to him. And whatever he had done, she did not wish it on him. What she felt, primarily and underneath everything else, was absence. The complete, clean absence of Ryan Prescott as a relevant factor in her interior life. Not forgetting, she would not forget, and she did not try to. But the way you filed a thing properly, so it stopped taking up working memory. It was there, it was understood, it was not in the foreground anymore. She made her first almond tort of the season on a Thursday in mid-March, and did not think about Ryan at all. Thomas Hartley started coming in later. Not late. He was a man constitutionally incapable of sleeping past 6, but later than he had been coming in. 8:30 instead of 6, sometimes 9. He came in through the back, made coffee, sat at the prep counter, and talked to Dara and the afternoon person, Marcus, and did the inventory checks he had done every week for 30 years, but at a pace that acknowledged that the pace itself was no longer the emergency management of a business running on borrowed stability. His back was better when he wasn't lifting things before his muscles had warmed up. His doctor said this with the slightly exasperated satisfaction of a person whose advice was finally being taken. He said to Emily one afternoon, sitting at the prep counter while she worked on the next morning's batch prep, "You going to tell me what's happening with Callahan?" She kept working. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know what it is." She was quiet for a moment. She measured flour. "I don't have a clean word for it yet." "Does it need a clean word?" She looked at him. "Not right now." He drank his coffee. "He good to you?" She thought about the hand through the car window. The oven repaired without fanfare. The way he sat at the corner table like he was exactly where he intended to be and not performing the intention for anyone. Though that's the reason I'm comfortable saying out loud. The 12-second pause before the word yes, when she asked if he was coming to a gala in a world he could have navigated far more strategically without her on his arm. "He's honest," she said. "That's the main thing." Her father nodded slowly. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Your grandfather used to say that honest was the hardest thing to find and the easiest to lose." He was right, Emily said. He usually was. He set the cup down. "All right." He went back to his inventory. Emily went back to the flour. So, Dominic came in 5 days a week now, and on the 2 days he didn't come in, Emily was aware of his absence the way you were aware of a changed sound in a room you knew well, not as a lack exactly, but as a difference with its own character. They had developed a language for each other that operated mostly below the level of explicit statement. She knew that when he arrived with the specific set of his shoulders, that meant he had come from something difficult. She should not ask about it directly, but should let him sit for 20 minutes with his coffee before she came out from behind the counter. She knew that he took his second cup slightly weaker than his first. She knew that he did not like to be thanked for things he had done deliberately, that the thanks created a transaction where there had been a choice, and the distinction mattered to him. He had learned things about her, too. She had watched him learning them over the months the way she had watched the season change, incrementally, without announcement. He had learned that she was not someone who needed to be handled on difficult days, but that difficult days had a specific quality she tried to hide and didn't entirely manage to. He had learned that she expressed her state of mind through her work, that the days when she overproduced were the days when something was unresolved in her, that the days when everything came out exactly right were not necessarily the best days, but were the most controlled ones. He had learned that she laughed at unexpected things and that the laugh surprised her every time, like it hadn't occurred to her that the moment was going to produce it. He had come in on a morning in early April to find her laughing at something her father had said through the pass-through, and he had stood just inside the door and watched her laugh, and had not moved or announced himself for 5 or 6 seconds, just standing there with his coffee money in his hand and something on his face that she only saw because she turned before he expected her to. He had arranged his expression quickly, but not before she saw it. She had poured his coffee without saying anything about it. They were doing that, moving toward something with the particular patience of two people who had both been burned by moving toward things quickly and who had learned, in their different ways, to let important things develop at the speed they actually needed. On a morning in late April, Emily found the envelope. It was on the prep counter when she came down to start the ovens, in the spot where deliveries were sometimes left when the side entrance had been unlocked. It was not an ivory envelope with an embossed crest. It was a plain envelope, heavy stock, her name written on the front in handwriting she had seen before on signed documents. Inside was a copy of the building deed. Not the whole building. The leasing section was unchanged, as agreed. But attached to the deed transfer documentation was a supplementary agreement she had to read 3 times to understand. Dominic's company had transferred the structural maintenance covenant of the building to a separate holding entity. The entity's name was listed. The named contact for the entity was Emily Hartley. She was not the owner of the building. She was not buying it. What she held now was a formal maintenance governance stake, the right to approve structural decisions, to weigh in on building alterations, to object to changes that affected the commercial units. The bakery could not be demolished, renovated away, or significantly altered without her formal agreement. She read it again. She sat down on the prep stool and held the papers in her hands and looked at the flour dust on the prep counter and listened to the building settle in the early morning way it settled, the small domestic sounds of a structure that had been standing for 60 years and intended to go on standing. She picked up her phone. It was 5:48 in the morning. She called him. He answered on the second ring. She could tell from the quality of his voice that he had been awake for a while. "Emily?" "The building document," she said. A pause. "I was going to mention it." "When?" "At a reasonable hour." She looked at the papers. "Dominic, what is this?" "It's what it says it is," he said. His voice was level, but underneath the level, she could hear something that she had learned to recognize over the months. The very slight tension of a man who had done something that mattered to him and was now waiting to understand whether it had been received the way he intended it. "The building isn't going anywhere. The bakery isn't going anywhere. I wanted that to be a legal fact and not just a current circumstance." She pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum. Not a dramatic gesture, just the involuntary response of her body to the specific pressure of being given something she had not known she needed until it was in her hands. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know I didn't have to." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to say it's just good business practice?" "No," he said. "I'm not going to say that." She looked at the papers one more time. Then she set them carefully on the counter, flat, in the spot where important things went when they needed to be kept safe. She looked at the corner table through the pass-through. "The rolls will be ready at 5:30, she said. "I'll be there," he said. She hung up. She tied her apron. She started the ovens. The building warmed around her the way it always warmed, slowly and from the inside out, and the light outside the window was doing the thing it did in late April, arriving early now, gray turning to pale gold along the roofline before 6, the seam of the horizon getting lighter by degrees until suddenly it was morning. He came in at 5:52. She had his coffee ready. She set it on the counter as he came through the door, and he stopped at the counter instead of going directly to the corner table, which was a departure from his usual pattern, and she noticed the departure but didn't mark it, just let it be what it was. He picked up the coffee. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Sit down," she said. "The roll needs another 4 minutes." He went to the corner table. He sat. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup the way he always did. Emily went back to the ovens. She pulled the tray at exactly the right moment. The rolls with that specific color that meant done without being overdone. The crust set. The inside still carrying heat. She put 2 on a plate, which she had never done before. She always put 1 on a plate. She put two on a plate and brought them to the corner table and set them down and pulled out the chair across from him and sat. He looked at the plate, then at her. "Two," he said. "I haven't eaten," she said. He picked up his coffee. She took a roll and broke it, and it was exactly right. The inside had that texture, soft without being underdone, the crust giving cleanly at the break. She ate it without ceremony. He watched her for a moment, and then he did the same. They ate in the early morning bakery in the April light, with the ovens warm behind them and the street outside still quiet, and the chair that was always left down on the floor between them, because it had been a long time since putting it up. Each evening had seemed like the right thing to do. Her father came down at 7:15 and stopped in the kitchen doorway when he saw them both at the corner table and did not say anything, just made his coffee with the specific quietness of a man who understood he was in the presence of something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with him simultaneously. He went back to the kitchen. Emily and Dominic talked about small things, the weather, a drainage issue in the Red Hook properties, a new supplier she was considering for the summer fruit pastries. They talked the way people talked when they had already said the important things, and the ordinary things had become a form of intimacy themselves. At 8:15, Dominic stood to go. He picked up his jacket. He stopped beside her chair. He put his hand on her shoulder, briefly, firmly, the way he did things that mattered to him. And then he went toward the side entrance, the one that had become his entrance so gradually that there was no moment she could point to where it had changed. She heard the door. She heard the street. She sat at the corner table in the morning light with the empty plate and the two coffee cups and the flour dust on her hands, and thought about nothing specific and everything in general, the way you sat when life had just resolved itself into something you could actually hold. By May, the bakery was the fullest it had been in a decade. Not because anything dramatic had changed, because everything ordinary had been allowed to run without the constant pressure of impending loss. Dara had taken on the early shift fully, which freed Emily's mornings for production. Marcus had proved himself reliable enough to close twice a week, which freed Emily's evenings for the first time in 3 years. Her father came in at his own pace, which turned out to be exactly the right pace. He knew every customer by name, and the customers knew him, and that continuity was its own form of value that Emily had known intellectually and now understood in her body. The neighborhood came through the door and kept coming. The woman from the gala, Miriam, had started a standing order for her husband's birthday bread. The logistics woman from Red Hook, whose name turned out to be Sandra, had stopped in on a Tuesday morning on her way to a port meeting and had stayed for 45 minutes and left with 2 bags of product and a card that said she'd be back. She came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. Small things. Ordinary things. The accumulation of ordinary things into a life that had weight and texture and was entirely, unapologetically her own. One morning in June, Emily was behind the counter when the bell rang, and she looked up, and it was Charlotte Kingsley. She came in alone, the same way she had come in January. Camel coat, flat boots. She looked, Emily thought, different, not dramatically, but in the way a person looked when they had been through a season that had cost them something, and had come out the other side not diminished, but altered. Reweighted, maybe. Like the structure was the same, but the distribution had shifted. She sat at a table near the window, not the corner table. Emily brought her a coffee without asking. Charlotte wrapped both hands around it. She drank from it immediately this time. "I wanted to come sooner," Charlotte said. "I wasn't sure what to say." "You don't have to say anything specific," Emily said. Charlotte looked at her. "I broke the engagement 3 days after the gala, formally. The announcement went out the following week." She said it steadily. "It was the right thing. That doesn't make it a small thing." "No," Emily said, "it doesn't. He's back in Park Slope." She looked at the window. "I don't know what he does now. I don't follow it." She said this carefully, like someone who had made a specific decision about the limits of their own knowledge and was honoring it. "I just wanted to not have it be a thing we never spoke about, between us." Emily looked at this woman who had walked into a very difficult room in January and asked an honest question, and had sat with the honest answer, and had done the hard thing with the information when she had it. "For what it's worth," Emily said, "I think you handled everything with more grace than the situation required." Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Then, "My father keeps saying I should sue someone. He hasn't decided who yet." Something moved across her face, not quite humor, but adjacent to it. I keep telling him the situation resolved itself without litigation. He finds that deeply unsatisfying. Emily almost laughed. That sounds right for him. It's very him. Charlotte drank her coffee. The lease renewals went through. His people finished with Callahan's people last week. She paused. He's very good at what he does. I know, Emily said. Charlotte looked at her. You're good for each other, she said. It was direct, the way she said everything. I don't know you well, and I don't know him at all, but from what I could see, you're good for each other. Emily held this. I think so too, she said. Charlotte finished her coffee. She bought 4 rolls and a small loaf of the dark rye that had become their bestseller that spring. She said goodbye at the door and meant it, and Emily believed that she meant it, and believed also that Charlotte Kingsley was going to be all right, was probably already, in the ways that mattered, more all right than she had been in a while. The door closed, the bell settled. The bakery held its own ordinary noise. The 2 cups appeared on a Wednesday in July. Emily had been unlocking the front on a morning when the heat was already building before 7. The sidewalk warm under her shoes, the sky the white blue of deep summer over Brooklyn. She got the door open, she propped it to let the air move through. She went to the counter to start the register. Dominic was already at the corner table. She didn't know how he had gotten in. The side entrance, probably. She thought she had locked it, but she might have been wrong, or he had a key, or some arrangement existed between him and the building that she had not needed to formalize. None of those explanations felt surprising. That itself was information. He was sitting at the corner table with 2 cups of black coffee, both waiting. She stood at the counter and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the bakery was warm and quiet, and the summer light was coming through the windows at the angle it came through in July, long and golden, making the flour dust visible in the air. She removed her apron. She left it on the counter. She walked to the corner table and sat across from him and picked up the 2nd cup of coffee and held it. He watched her. You made coffee, she said. I know where you keep things, he said. She looked at the cup. It was exactly right. The way she made it, the specific concentration she used for the 1st cup of the day. He had made it exactly right. How long have you known how I make my coffee? She asked. He looked at her steadily. Since February. She absorbed this. February. 5 months of sitting at this table and watching and not performing what he was learning and not using it for anything except this. This morning, this cup, this specific act of paying attention to something small because it mattered to someone who mattered to him. She drank the coffee. It was exactly right. Rolls are in the oven, she said. 8 minutes. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She looked at him across the corner table in the summer morning light. This man who had been told to everyone who would listen that he was someone to fear, and who sat in her bakery every morning and drank coffee and was completely, without performance or agenda, present. She had spent 5 years with a man who was always halfway out the door toward his next position. She had learned the particular exhaustion of loving someone who was perpetually leaving. This was different. This was someone who had decided where he was and had stopped moving, and whose stillness was not stagnation, but the specific solidity of a person who had found the thing they were willing to stay for. She reached across the table. His hand was there before she had fully extended hers, the way it had been at the gala, the way it had been in the car, the way it always was. Not rushed, not performed, just there, decisive and warm. She placed her hand in his. Outside, Brooklyn was waking up. The street sounds were starting. The delivery trucks, the voices, the particular urban percussion of a summer morning in a neighborhood that had been waking up this way for decades. The ovens were running. In 8 minutes, the rolls would be done. Her father would be down at 7:30, and Dara would come in at 8, and the day would proceed the way days proceeded, imperfectly, practically, with the accumulated small demands of a life actually being lived. But right now there were 2 cups of coffee on the corner table and morning light on the wooden floor and her hand in his. And the bakery smelled of what it had always smelled of, and the sign above the door still read Hartley's in the old block letters that had been there for 30 years. The man she had nearly married had left because he saw a better calculation. The man across the table had stayed through a winter and a spring and into a summer for no reason that could be entered into any ledger, and the staying was the whole answer. And Emily Hartley, who had built things with her hands her entire life, recognized the foundation of something real when she was sitting inside it. She did not need it to be anything other than what it was. She held his hand. She drank her coffee. The rolls came out of the oven 8 minutes later, exactly right, the way they did every morning. Not because perfection was achievable, but because she had learned her work and done it long enough and faithfully enough that the good result came more often than not. And that was enough. That had always been enough. It was enough now.